Chapter 29. Rash looked up from the Park Avenue sidewalk in angry frustration as the helicopter descended toward the MetLife building. The damn thing was early. It was only 5:45 and the copter was landing. He'd been trying to get there in time. He'd been caught in traffic. He'd gone through hell trying to get the van parked. He'd finally made it with 10 minutes to spare, and the goddamn copter was early. He didn't have time for subtlety. He'd been thinking about trying to sneak up there with a hidden weapon, maybe take a hostage or something, but there was no time to try anything that complicated. Instead, he went for the direct approach. He pulled an automatic rifle out of the collection in the back of the van, slung an ammo belt on his shoulder, and headed for the MetLife building. He charged in from the north, the side away from the Grand Central Station, with the rifle ready in his hands. Terrified late commuters scattered as he ran through the lobby. When an elevator door opened, he pointed the weapon into the car. "Police!" he shouted. "Everybody out! This is an emergency!" The frightened businessman hurried to obey, and a moment later Rash had the elevator all to himself and was headed upward. 5 minutes later, he burst out onto the rooftop, shouting, "All right, drop!" Then he saw Schaefer standing there, M16 in hand, guarding half a dozen unarmed men with their hands on their heads. He finished weakly. "Jesus, Rash," Schaefer said. "Where the hell have you been?" Rash stared angrily, then smiled. "Got held up in traffic, Schaefer," he said. "Well, you're here now. Let's get the hell out of here and get on with business." They left Phillips and his men sitting on the roof of the MetLife building, their wrists tied behind them, and then headed for Rash's rented van. Schaefer smiled at the sight of the arsenal in the back, but he didn't say anything about it. Instead, he climbed into the passenger side, laid his appropriated M16 across his lap, and told Rash, "Head downtown." Rash shrugged and started the engine. "You want to tell me what the hell happened in Central America? And how you wound up on the MetLife heliport holding that pop gun on a US Army general?" "Nope." Rash backed out of his parking spot. "Okay, it can wait," he said. "Care to tell me what we're going to do now?" Schaefer nodded at the weapons. "We're going to use this stuff to blow those alien shits to hell." Rash considered that as he maneuvered the van out into traffic and got it headed out south on Park Avenue. He considered it very carefully. Schaefer obviously knew they were up against aliens. Rash didn't know how he knew, but he knew. Maybe Phillips had told him. But how much did he know about them really? Talking about blowing them to hell, Rash didn't think Schaefer appreciated just what he was saying. As he waited for the light at 23rd Street, he remarked, "You know, Schaefer, you've been out of town. Maybe you're not caught up on everything. I've been giving this some thought, and it seems to me we're outgunned." "Why's that?" Schaefer asked, shifting the M16 and glancing at the darkly gleaming weapons in the back. "Come on, Schaefer, you have to ask," Rash said. "They're invisible, they've got spaceships, they probably have ray guns the way they shot up those guys." "They do," Schaefer agreed. "I've seen them." "You haven't seen their ships, have you?" "Nope." "I have," Rash told him. "Big ones, cruising over the city. You can see them through that mask you took off the one on Beekman. I don't know how many ships, or how many of those things are on each ship. More than one, though. I've seen at least 4. So I'll go through the doors with you any day, Schaefer, but we can't take those fuckers on alone. It's suicide." "Who said anything about taking them down alone?" The light changed, and Rash stepped on the gas, trying to figure out what Schaefer was talking about. The feds weren't going to help. The whole damn government seemed to be on the side of the aliens, going by the plan to hand Schaefer over to them. And Phillips would make sure that the rest of the NYPD was out of the picture too. McComb and company weren't about to argue with him. Salvati and Brownlow and a few others might have helped, except Salvati hadn't been out on the streets in years. He'd been running a desk, and right now he was still banged up enough that Rash wasn't sure he could handle that. And Rash didn't know where Brownlow was, or how far he'd be willing to go. He and Ortiz and the rest still thought this was some kind of terrorist deal that the feds were hushing up. Besides, Schaefer didn't know all about Salvati or Brownlow. He hadn't asked where Rash had gotten all the guns. Schaefer had never exactly had a lot of close friends on the force, so he wasn't talking about recruiting more cops. So who did he think was going to help? "Take 4th Avenue, Schaefer said as Union Square came into sight. He turned around in his seat and began looking through the array of weapons in the back. "Do you mind telling me where the hell we're going?" Rash asked. "Carr's place." Schaefer put the M16 down and reached back. "Carr?" Rash's foot hit the brake without conscious direction. "Keep rolling," Schaefer said. "Yeah, Carr. Who else has got a personal grudge against those things, besides you, me, and the rest of the department? Carr is a complete psycho." "I know," Schaefer said, coming up with a pump-action shotgun. He began loading shells. "Seems to me that's what we need for this." "How the hell do you know where Carr is now? You've been gone for more than a week." "I don't know for sure," Schaefer replied, "but I have a pretty good idea." "How?" Rash demanded. "Why should Carr be anywhere you know?" "Because Lamb's dead," Schaefer explained. "Carr's going to try and take over the whole schmear, and that means he's got to be where Lamb's people can find him, so they can sign up. And that includes all the junkies who are down to their last few brain cells. So Carr's going to be where Carr always is, when he's not hiding. And you know where that is." Schaefer didn't bother to answer that. "Turn left," he said. Rash decided not to argue anymore. He drove, following Schaefer's directions. A few moments later, they pulled up across the street from a decaying tenement with Death Zone painted across the door. "That's it?" Rash asked. Schaefer nodded. "He might be out to dinner or something." "He might be, but he isn't," Schaefer said. "I can feel it." "You and your goddamn feelings," Rash muttered. "What if he isn't in there, Schaefer?" "Then we'll look somewhere else until we find him," Schaefer said as he got out of the van. He looked over the building, then leaned back in the window of the van and said, "You wait here. If I'm not back in 10 minutes, come inside and kill anything that moves." Rash glanced back at the arsenal, thinking about the possibilities, and smiled grimly. "My pleasure," he said. He watched as Schaefer crossed the street. Schaefer seemed to know what he was doing, but Rash had doubts. Yeah, they needed manpower, but recruiting off the streets like this... Well, Schaefer always had a knack for bringing out the best in people, one way or another. Sometimes it was their best effort to kill the big son of a bitch, but hey, it was their best. The door was open a few inches. Schaefer pushed it open farther with his foot and stepped cautiously inside, shotgun ready. The front hall light was out, but lights were on somewhere upstairs, and the glow from the stairwell was more than enough to see by. The floor was strewn with debris. The walls were painted with obscene graffiti that failed to hide the stains, and the whole place stank of human waste. A chunk of ceiling had fallen away, exposing badly corroded pipes. One pipe was dripping slowly. "Hey, Carr!" Schaefer bellowed. He marched forward to the foot of the stairs and shouted upward, "Carr! It's Schaefer! I know you're here, you son of a bitch! Come out! I want to talk!" Schaefer heard the crunch of plaster underfoot a fraction of a second before he heard the shotgun blast. He had started to turn around when the gun boomed, and plaster dust, sawdust, and water showered down on him. Carr had been in one of the darkened front rooms that Schaefer had passed without checking, and he had fired a warning shot into the ceiling. The corroded pipes overhead had been punctured in a dozen places by the pellets, and only the low water pressure kept the spray from blinding Schaefer. By the time he had turned to face Carr, he had heard the distinctive racket of a fresh shell being pumped into the chamber. Carr was standing there, grinning. "Okay, Oprah," Carr announced. "If you want to sing in the shower, I'm game. Lose the scattergun, and we can talk." He shoved the shortened barrel of his shotgun up close to Schaefer's ear. Schaefer dropped his own weapon, safety on, tossing it far enough that it landed clear of the spray. "I got to admit, you've got balls coming here," Carr said conversationally. "I've been picturing your brains on a wall since the night Lamb and the rest bought it. You got a reason I shouldn't get to see that." "Come on, Carr," Schaefer said. "My men didn't kill your punks. Get real." "Oh, Carr grinned. Then whose men did? Schaefer could see Carr's finger tightening on the trigger. Carr, arrogant bastard that he was, might just be crazy enough to blow him away without waiting to hear what he had to say. Wasn't men at all, he said. It was something worse than men. Good trick, Carr said, and he closed one eye, sighting down the barrel. Schaefer ducked, dropping below the gun's muzzle, and came up fist first into Carr's face. Carr stumbled back, and Schaefer was on top of him, too close in for the gun to be any use except perhaps as a club. The two men fell to the floor, splashing dirty water in all directions. After a moment's struggle, Schaefer had Carr in a headlock and shouted at him, "God damn it, listen to me! I need your help, you son of a bitch!" He slammed Carr's head against a baseboard. "I didn't come here to fight you!" Carr didn't bother to answer as he struggled to free himself. Schaefer began to loosen his grip slightly, hoping Carr would listen to reason. And suddenly, agony cut through his neck and up the side of his head, like a hot knife under the skin, a pressure on his throat almost choking him. He released his hold on Carr and stumbled back. "Ah," he said. "It's here, son of a bitch. It's around here somewhere."